Hello and welcome to tonight's episode of The Council. I'm your host, David Dean, and tonight we are coming to you live from our studio here at Gay Life Television in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'd like to thank all of our viewers who are watching us from Roku, Justin.tv, and MondoClub.com. During tonight's episode, I'd also like to invite all of our viewers who are watching along to call into the studio at 412-567-0381 so you can join the conversation and ask questions of myself or my guest. Tonight, I have with me Maria Ponzi, who holds a master's degree in public health and is a community health educator. We're going to be talking about a topic that has been dead from the news for some time, which means you know we're not talking about it enough, and that would be sex ed in our public schools. Maria.
Yes.
Why don't you go ahead and tell our viewers a little bit more about what you do before we get into the material for tonight?
Sure. I do what is called evidence-based programming, which means all of the curriculum that I use has been proven to change behaviors. The curriculum that I focus on is a HIV prevention curriculum. And I can do the curriculum in any type of educational setting, so public or private schools, in any type of community setting as well.
All right. So let's start here. Do you think that public schools do enough in terms of sex education and HIV prevention?
Not even a little close. Not at all.
Now, in your line of work, you oftentimes will have to sort of appeal to a school board for a district to even get in and do programming. Can you tell me a little bit about what the experience of that is like and what type of resistance you come against when you're trying to bring programming into a school?
Sure. Sometimes it is a positive experience. I don't want to say that they're always negative. Unfortunately, most of the time it is extremely negative, though. For the ones that were positive, it was just more about educating the school board members on what I'm going to do and what the results could possibly be from me doing that. In more negative situations, it's been so bad where they have not even let me get on the agenda for the school board meeting. So there are school boards who have just blocked me from stating my case altogether.
And you cover Western PA from, is it Lawrence County to Erie now?
Pretty much.
Right, so big geographic area there.
Yes.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what is it you think that school boards and parents and teachers are afraid of when we talk about having sex ed in public schools?
Well, no one really wants to think about teens having sex. And when it comes to school board members, they feel that there's going to be a lot of parental backlash when the parents find out that I'm going to be in there and talking to their children about birth control and condoms. The reality is there's only a very small minority of parents who are actually against this. The majority of parents are for this. School boards are just not letting them speak, so they're unaware that there would not be as much parental backlash as they feel actually.
All right, and do you, so then do you find you have an easy time often getting parents actually on board with programming?
Most of the time, yeah, the parents are all for it. They're like, oh, this is so exciting, so happy you're doing this. And a lot of times that's followed by, you know, better you than me kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, most of the time parents are okay. Again, I have run into parents who are not okay with it. They not only do not want me talking to their children about condoms and birth control, they don't want me talking to them about the consequences of sex at all. They don't want the word brought up in any way, shape, or form.
Right. How often do you encounter kind of the misconception that having sex ed is going to promote or encourage young people to have sex?
Anytime I'm in a school, that's abstinence-only school, because that is their basis. If we tell kids about birth control and condoms, then they're actually going to use those things.
All right. During Barack Obama's campaign for the presidency, he talked a lot about having age-appropriate sex ed in our schools. Can you talk a little bit about what we mean when we say age-appropriate sex ed for all grades?
Well, age appropriate, unfortunately, there's not a consensus on what that is yet. Amongst educators, we in the field of sex education are well aware on what we should be talking about at certain grade levels. Unfortunately, the Department of Education, I don't want necessarily to say they don't agree. They just haven't come out and said, okay, in third grade, we're going to do this. In sixth grade, we're going to do this. Ninth grade and 12th grade and so on and so on. They haven't really set the standards yet. The only thing they've said is that by the time children graduate high school, they have to have some form of HIV education. And that is the only standard that they've put into place so far.
I can tell you from when I was in high school, we didn't even talk about the reproductive system until I was in 11th grade, and 5 other students in my grade already had children of their own. So I would say that may have been a little bit late in coming.
A little bit.
How early do you think we need to be starting this conversation about contraception and safe sex?
Well, contraception and safe sex is such a broad topic. Whenever parents ask me, oh my goodness, when should I start talking to my child about sex? And I tell them, like, well, if your child's riding the school bus, they already know more than what you think they do. So this is a lifelong conversation. This is not something that you sit down for one time for 30 minutes and talk about. This is a continuous thing. There are students who are in third grade who are starting puberty. There are girls in third grade that have already started their period. But they don't get the puberty talk in school until they're in sixth grade. So we truly have to look at everything, the bigger picture, and we have to start way, way young. We have to tell these kids what's going to happen to their body, so they're well prepared for that. And along with that, they need to understand decision-making on all levels, not just when we're talking about sex, but just decision-making in general, so they know how to stick up for themselves from a very, very young age. So by the time they get into 6th, 7th, 8th grade and they're starting to get pressured to have sex, saying no is not something that's a difficult concept for them.
All right. Apart from the lack of consensus on what age-appropriate sex education is, do you think the Obama administration has sort of made good on its promise that provided in schools?
Not at all. Not at all. I feel that was something that was talked about a lot, but when it came down to actually doing it, and when it came down to making sure that things were getting done, it hasn't happened at all.
By contrast, the Bush administration had really pushed heavily for sex ed, but only from an abstinence-only perspective. Can you talk a little bit about what abstinence-only programs entail and what their effectiveness is like?
Sure. Unfortunately, the Bush administration pushed for abstinence till marriage programs, which is a little bit different than just abstinence-only programming. Abstinence-only programming talks about abstinence as the only safe choice when it comes to sexual decision making. It doesn't, if a question is brought up about condoms or birth control, you can't answer it, but you follow that question or that answer up with, but abstinence is the only safe way. Abstinence till marriage program, it's just abstinence. If a question is brought up about condoms, a question is brought up about birth control, it's really not answered. It's sort of pushed away to the side.
Do you think that abstinence till marriage programs unnecessarily and perhaps inappropriately bring a particular brand of religious beliefs into the programming that may not have a place there?
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
And how do you think that affects programming, especially when you are talking to a diverse group of students?
It affects it a lot. I mean, even when we're in schools now, even schools that are not abstinence-only schools where I can go in, I can give the whole comprehensive spiel, sometimes something is brought up, oh, well, I'm waiting until marriage because that's what I believe in. And of course I encourage that, and I think that's great. And every once in a while you'll get a child in the classroom that will say, well, what about people who can't get married? Because we believe they're unable to. So now, more today than when I first started my career in this field, that is coming up more now than it did before. So I think if those programs were still around in abundance as they were in the 90s or as they were at the beginning of the century, then that would, I mean, it would be devastating, the amount of the STD rates that we would see in teens and teen pregnancies.
So by comparison, do you think even though the Obama administration hasn't necessarily brought to fruition the idea that we have sex education to the degree that we should, do you think things are better, the same, or worse than they were 10 years ago?
I would say that they're better, only because now, during the Bush administration, Bush actually gave schools a financial incentive to adopt these abstinence till marriage programs. So the school districts, they said, yes, we're going to do abstinence till marriage program. They actually got money from the government just because they adopted these programs. That money is no longer available to these school districts. So I would say that we're better in that sense. So now the school districts do not have a financial incentive to actually do that. So that's a good thing. Because that money is no longer available, I've been able to get these school districts to go back to the comprehensive methods that they were using in the 90s. So I think we're ahead of the game on that aspect. But that's truly about the only positive thing that's happened so far.
So overall, is there less money available for sex ed?
There's very, very little money available for sex ed, correct.
But by contrast, it's simply the lack of financial incentive for abstinence till marriage programs sort of caused the default to go back to comprehensive programs.
Correct.
Yes, she said yes.
Okay. All right. And I think that the abstinence till marriage programs actually intersect another point of interest for me, the show, and I think many of our viewers, which would be, how are LGBT students impacted by sex education, and are they well served by the programs we have in place?
They are not well served at all. Some of the curriculum that's available, including the one that I use, they have these alternative activities that you can do that would have an all-male couple, an all-female couple in there, and you just throw it into the mix when you're talking about decision-making. And when we're talking about evidence-based programming, there has not been an evidence-based curriculum developed yet specifically for gay youth. So they're just these very generic scenarios that are thrown in to these very broad curriculum to begin with. So I feel that they are extremely underserved. I even feel sometimes that they can be singled out or left out completely when we're doing some of the courses.
To that point, I would have to agree, especially with abstinence till marriage programs, especially 10 years ago when same-sex couples could not get married. And I think that, you know, by not talking about it, we essentially don't normalize the course of development towards identifying as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender for students. And just as well, I think that that makes it more difficult for those students to talk about the issues they encounter or even ask for help. Would you agree?
I agree completely.
All right. How often do schools react to the idea that LGBT material may be included in sex ed material?
Most of the public schools are not okay with me adding in those alternative activities at all. I bring it up at the very beginning when we have our meetings at the beginning of the school year, and that is just a topic that they do not want to touch at all.
So would you say that's a form of discrimination in public schools?
Absolutely, I do. I think it's failing their education by not providing even just a small little 5-minute activity. That's all it is. It's not an entire curriculum. It's just one little activity, and they don't want to hear it.
And that to this day is a hot button issue in public schools.
Yes.
All right. Well, we are going to be taking a break here shortly, and Maria and I will be back right after this break, talk a little bit more about sex ed in public schools, and get into the topic of HIV. We'll be right back with you. Welcome back to the Council here on Gay Life Television, where you can find us on Roku, Justin.tv, and MondoClub.com. Tonight, I have community health educator Maria Ponzi with me, and we are talking about sex ed in public schools, and we're about to broach the topic of HIV, its prevention and funding here in a second. But I would also like to remind all of our viewers who are following along live that you may call into the station at 412-567-0381 if you would like to join the conversation or ask a question. All right. So Maria, I understand that there has been a lot of cutbacks in funding for HIV prevention recently. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Where the cutback happened was in prevention. The trend that is going on in HIV now is that they're doing what's called treatment as prevention model. With that model, that means what they're going to do is, for those who are positive, who are in treatment, they are going to work with those individuals to prevent them from infecting other people. But as far as someone like me, working with those who are not infected, keep them uninfected, the money has completely dried up.
So what type of position does that leave you in trying to essentially spread the word about HIV?
A tricky one. Unfortunately, when I first started this position many moons ago, we were able to do everything that we did at no cost to the community. So we could go into the schools, we can go into whoever invited us in, we would not charge them. We would go in for free. Unfortunately, because of funding and how things are changing in HIV prevention, it's getting to the point now where we are going to have to charge for the services that we offer.
What were some of the reasons given for why that funding was cut?
They felt that it would be more effective if they switched to that treatment as prevention model. They felt that in prevention that we weren't actually getting the results that they felt that we should be getting. They felt that there were not enough people that were not getting infected in order to justify continuing those services.
So here's an interesting paradox. If we're going to do treatment as prevention, that would require a conversation to be had only with someone who is in treatment. Therefore, if we're not doing prevention and talking to the general public who isn't identified as HIV positive, there is no discussion about HIV and perhaps no encouragement for them to get tested and perhaps discover that they are positive. So does that mean, maybe I'm way off base here, but does that mean that there could be a lot of people walking around with no clue about HIV who are in fact positive but not in treatment and therefore unwittingly spreading it?
Absolutely, absolutely. 10 years from now, we are going to see a huge, huge problem coming from this decision of doing this. Absolutely. Have
any numbers come out since the beginning of this change in programming that show any difference in rates of infection?
No, this happened as of July 1, so it's only been a few months, so that no numbers have come out yet.
Do you predict that perhaps rates of treatment will also slow down, considering fewer people will be seeking testing and getting into treatment?
Yeah, absolutely. Without people understanding the risk of HIV, without people understanding, hey, you know what, I did this, maybe I should get tested. If they don't do that, if they don't find out they're positive, they are never going to get into treatment.
Additionally, HIV has historically been thought about as a gay disease. In fact, in the 80s, when it was first coming to be understood and first identified as an illness of its own, it was referred to by the media, and it was always a media term, it was never a scientific term, as GRID, gay-related immune disease. And now, of course, to some extent, that myth has held true in the mind of the public. How do you respond to the notion that HIV is a gay disease?
Well, when I'm speaking to, it's very different how I answer that question, whether I'm in a room full of youth or a room full of adults. When I'm speaking to adults, I sort of understand why they think that, because they remember it. They lived it. They lived through the media. They lived through the GRID scare. So I just try to very politely educate them that the thought that a disease could only attack the immune system of a gay male is physiologically ridiculous. So not to mention now, today, gay men are not the only people that are affected by this. They weren't the only people affected by it in the 80s. That's just what the media focused on. So when I'm in a room full of adults, I'm very blunt about it. When I'm in a room full of young people, the only reason why they even understand the concept of, that this was a gay disease is because, again, their dad, their uncle, their grandpa told them that. So it's not something they're hearing now today. They're just hearing it from the people who, again, lived through that scenario. So again, I just explained to them, this is not the case. This is a disease. This is a virus. It's just like the flu. Anybody can get it. You put yourself at risk, you're going to get it.
Speaking of putting oneself at risk, would you like to talk briefly about what everyone should know about modes of transmission?
Sure, absolutely. This disease is passed through fluids. It is passed through semen, through vaginal fluids, blood, and breast milk. So any behavior, no matter what the behavior is, if someone comes in contact with any of those 4 fluids from another person, if that other person has HIV, it's going to pass.
And would you like to talk a little bit about what resources are available for testing for those people who are curious, afraid, interested?
Sure, absolutely. There is a lot of agencies that are around that offer free HIV testing. A lot of times today, when it's a free HIV test, it's going to be a blood draw. Every once in a while, people may run into what's called the OraSure test or the OraQuick, which is a test where they can use the saliva in someone's mouth. That test is extremely expensive, and now that the prevention funding has been moved to treatment, OraSure is becoming very, very difficult to find. So unfortunately, a blood test is what most people are going to find today. Even if someone just Googled, free HIV test and then put the city that they lived in, they would be able to find an agency that would be able to help them.
Right, and that's one of the things that I had heard is that due to this lack of funding, that there were some cutbacks even in the free testing offered by agencies. Is that true across the board, or are agencies just switching to different test types?
They are switching to different test types, but there has been a lot of cutbacks. The way that funding is working now, if they only had a stream of HIV money that was set aside just for testing, yeah, that agency can no longer offer testing because now all of that money has gone into treatment. So those facilities, unfortunately, will not be offering testing anymore. Facilities that did other healthcare things or have different other funding streams that are not HIV related are still able to offer those tests.
And has that reduced the number of sites available then to get HIV testing done?
Yes, they have.
Does HIV testing still involve pre- and post-test counseling sessions to talk about prevention and risk reduction?
It does. They've changed over the past couple of years, and they've definitely changed now since July 1 because that pre- and post-test counseling session was all about prevention. And now that prevention money isn't here, the pre- and post-test counseling session, the parameters of them have changed drastically. They still exist, they've changed a lot.
All right. So what are some of your thoughts in terms of what's the next step, or what's the direction we should go? What's the solution to the problems we see coming?
Oh my goodness. Well, I feel that schools should be held accountable for their HIV education. They have to show proof that the students are actually learning the information and that they're learning accurate information. They can't just be told, this is what HIV is and that's it. They have to be able to be told how to prevent it, comprehensive, not just abstinence-only ways to prevent it. The schools have to be held accountable for that. I think that's extremely important. And we need to continue to fund prevention. Without funding prevention, then programs like mine eventually are just going to wither away and they're not going to be available.
Do you think agencies receiving grant funding for doing education are held to a higher standard than public schools themselves?
Absolutely, I do. Absolutely, I do. But that's okay. I feel that, if I'm going to go in and be like, I'm offering this sex ed curriculum, I am the specialist, so I should know a lot more than what just a regular teacher would know because this is what I'm doing. This is my only specialty. So I feel that it is completely okay to hold some people like me to a higher standard.
Right. And in terms of where the numbers on HIV stood over the past several years, I've heard it cited as one of the reasons that they decided to cut funding prevention and move to this treatment as prevention model is basically because we looked at the numbers and said, well, they haven't moved much since we really started funding them, so we're going to call that a failure and find a different way to approach this.
Yeah.
Do you think that's an accurate assessment, and do you also think that perhaps we were holding the line as opposed, even if not making drastic gains?
I feel that I'm not even quite sure how to approach that question. When you look at it just from a numbers perspective, I feel that if more people are getting tested and less people are showing up positive, from a prevention standpoint, that is awesome. But the way that the funding was going, that's not how they looked at it. If you had funding for prevention and testing, at least 1% of the people that you tested had to come back positive, which made zero sense to me. I'm out there telling people how not to get this and to go get tested. If I test 1,000 people and none of them come back positive, that should be a good thing. But in the eyes of the CDC and the Department of Health, that was a bad thing. They wanted people to be positive. They wanted to say, hey, we're paying you to test these people. You should be able to get some of them in the treatment. They weren't looking at it as, hey, great job. All these people you've been working with don't have HIV.
So our measurement on prevention, you would say, is a little bit backwards.
A little bit.
Speaking of not measuring things and therefore considering them to not be a problem, this kind of goes back to the age-appropriate stuff, but going down into, for instance, kindergarten. Whenever I have a discussion about age-appropriate sex ed, people are like, well, what does that mean? What do you tell kindergartners and first graders? I often talk about sexual abuse training and prevention programs, one of them being Good Touch, Bad Touch. Could you talk a little bit about those programs and what their purpose is?
Sure. Good touch, programs like Good Touch, Bad Touch truly just try to get kids to understand that sometimes, the overall message of it is that sometimes something that may feel good may not necessarily be good. It teaches them that. It teaches them what a bad touch actually is. It teaches them what to do. So if they find themselves in a situation where that's happening, it gives them resources, who to go to, what to say, how to say it. It also goes over, and this is a big thing, the appropriate terminology for body parts. That is huge. Because if you have, a 5-6-year-old saying something like yum yum, no one's going to know what they're talking about. So it also goes over all of the appropriate terminology.
So how then would you respond to a school district that basically says, no, we don't use a program like that, but we also don't have those problems here?
I would say, well, yeah, you think you don't have those problems because these kids don't know that what's going on is wrong. They have absolutely no idea that what's happening to them is wrong. They don't know what to do. They don't know who to go to. So yeah, you're not going to have any disclosures.
Well, Maria, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on. Are there any closing thoughts that you have to share?
I feel that if you are a parent living in a school district, or if you've gone to a school district where you know the sex ed curriculum was extremely lacking, call the superintendent, get on the agenda of the school board meeting, bring your information, bring a health educator, get them straight, and help students so that way I don't have to do this anymore.
All right. Thank you very much for coming on. I think you had some good information for us. Hopefully our viewers found that very valuable. Again, you can find us here on the Council at Gay Life Television from Roku, Justin.tv, and MondoClub.com, and I hope to see you again soon.